Oh man, today we talking about dress codes and lowriders and a whole bunch of other stuff that they was just talking about before I hit the camera to start. But come and join us on the other side. Welcome back to another episode of South Star Classroom. That's David, that's Julie, that's Omar. I am Charles, and we have the beard of knowledge, the beard of wisdom is leading us today. So let me just not even waste time and just give it to him. And David, lead us today, leader.
I will do my best. Good afternoon, everybody. We are today on episode 118 of the South Star Classroom. And as Dr. Cole shared, we're going to be talking about current events having to do with particular codes, policies, and laws that have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And when I say communities of color, I want to go back to the kind of root and the foundation of why we started this this podcast, talking specifically about Black and Brown communities. So we're gonna start with the here and now, and then we're gonna kind of work our way backwards as we move through the show, and then towards the end, definitely get into talking about solutions. But with all that said, I want to take a quick pause to do a check in, see how people are doing. Let's keep them concise. Let's keep it brief. Let's keep it highlights. I know I'm doing my thing. I got like a lesson. I got a lesson plan, and I got to keep moving.
Man, you just found the Charles Cole way of hate.
So he just saying we took 37 damn minutes last time when we was checking in. So
yeah,
I'll start.
All right, so the check.
Okay,
I'll make it quick. This is not a sad update. This is a happy update. But my aunt, I've been at the hospital and all that good stuff. She is. We are unplugging my aunt on Friday, but it's not a sad thing. Like I'm ready for us to unplug this joint. We got to say our goodbyes. Very, very, very sweet woman. Got a lot of tubes and stuff in her, and we are absolutely ready for her to go. Friday is her birthday. Unfortunately, I will be on the road, but I got to say my goodbyes and do what I need to do with my family, and we are all. We went into that very, very sober and in love to her sons. That is a very tough decision to have to make, and I honor and respect them for it. Yes, there you go. But happy. This is a good thing. So I will pass that on.
All right. Well, thank you, Charles, for that. And I mean, obviously condolences, but it sounds like it's the right thing to do, and nobody wants to see a loved one suffer like that, and so I'm glad you got to be with your family, especially at this time. So we're thinking about you and your family for sure.
Appreciate it. One of the benefits of being back in Chicago and not in California. So this would have been impossible had I been.
That's right.
In Oakland. So yeah,
that's right. Oh, all right, Omar. We're moving to you. What do you got for us?
How you been? Man, I got to follow up that ludicrously sad and transcendent comment.
Shit. It's not sad. It's celebration.
It's celebration.
Didn't you watch Coco? This is not sad.
There you go.
I did watch Chappelle's show where they talked about it's a celebration, and Rick James told me to enjoy myself.
Yes.
Not far from Jubilee singing DeBarge earlier and Jodeci. So that's what I'm celebrating today. No, man. Things have been interesting. I got a lot of personal friendship situations happening. Like a friend that's very sick that I'm really concerned about. I don't want to get into the details on the show, but it's a particularly difficult situation. I have another friend who came in town because she's having a very difficult situation, but she had a fun ass weekend. I think she just needed to get away, breathe that beautiful desert air. Sun's out till 5:30 here, and it's sunny almost every day. The exact opposite of what Charles was telling me, where the sun goes down at 1 p.m. in Chicago. So, like, I don't know, man. It's sunny, it's happy, and I'm gonna get out of here right at this show, right at time, because I'm gonna go play some tennis. That's how nice the weather is in El Paso. So that's what's up here.
Awesome! Wow.
All
right.
Take that. However this
Jubilee
thing works.
How are you?
It doesn't work. It's not working. Oh, I work for Jubilee.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am doing well. It's already going to be Thanksgiving next week, so I'm like really in awe of how fast time has flown. But grateful to
Truly.
soon be able to see my mom, who's going to be flying in and all that jazz. So I'm happy about that. Last week, my family had a big moment. My baby sis and my brother-in-law were on the Sherry Shepherd show because they gave birth to my nephew on the side of a New York highway. And so,
Oh, wow. Damn.
yeah, so I got
I thought you were joking about that. That's crazy.
Oh, it's a real story. And I was backstage being auntie nanny with my nieces and nephews. So it was a really great day. So I'm really happy for them. And yeah, so I'm well. I'm ready for the holidays, even though they came faster than expected. And love to you, Charles, and your family. Like, I know you said it's happy, but it's also a transition. So yeah, keep y'all in my prayers.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Yeah, let's transition into the show. And so what I wanted to do is I was reading I read one article in particular, like about a week and a half ago, and it kind of like sparked my memory and my thinking. And it had to do with the state that I live in, California. And it had to do with a particular assembly bill that I believe the governor signed, Assembly Bill 436. All right, so this is California. It's 2023, and we are at the point where the dominant culture is decided that it is appropriate and for people to be able to drive their lowrider cars on the street. Right, it's what we call.
Right.
Exactly. It's what we call. I mean, it's what we call cruising, right? And it's something that is it's deeply connected to Latino, Chicano, Mexican American culture, but now all cultures really. I mean, it's lowriding is a worldwide industry. So it's no longer
like lowriders too, David. You know what I'm saying?
I just said it. I said,
teasing you.
Hey man.
Oakland used to have a great on First Fridays. They had a great car show
sure.
every first Friday.
Yeah, and it started with like municipalities, like I think San Jose, and then a couple of others like Salinas. But now you're looking at a statewide overturning of a vehicle code, which previous made it illegal to cruise a lowrider on the street. You can get pulled over, ticketed, get your car impounded. Right? Nobody wants that to happen. This is a tradition that goes back to just post World War II. Right, with the all of these cars that were being manufactured in the United States, and people took up the sport of tricking out cars, painting them, putting hydraulics in them as kind of like time capsules to a particular point in time in history. But then there was a law that did not allow that, right? And so you had this whole big important part of Latino, Mexican American, Chicano culture that was essentially banned. It was made illegal, right, in California. And there's examples in other states too. I've looked it up. There's like these little things that they write into the vehicle codes, like your car has to be a certain number of inches off of the ground and XYZ. And so there's ways of getting around it, but it made me think of other laws, other policies. And now what we call like just basically codes. So the name of the show is Breaking the Codes. I also saw a story which is not it's from 2 years ago, but it probably happens every year, where a group of young female students at a suburban Atlanta, I think it was a middle school, um, were written up for for the kinds of clothes they wore, and the amount of skin, like basically measured down to the inches, right? Clothing that was too revealing, right? In that situation, you have, it's not a law, it's a school policy, right? That is kind of governing, or used to is being weaponized to control, how students dress, right? We've also seen examples where, and this is recent, right? This is not just boys, but boys and girls, African American boys and girls that have been penalized for having particular hairstyles, right? That are like very natural to African American boys and girls, right? But for some reason, deemed outside of the school's code of ethics or dress or whatever it is. We've also seen, the last example I'll put out there is this is from this last school year, where a senior, I don't know what her name is. I have the article here. That's not important. But they had strict requirements. They didn't want students to wear a graduation sash with, the image of anything else than, the U.S. flag. And she wore like one that had the United States flag and the flag of Mexico, right? And she was penalized for that, disciplined by that. I think they held on to her diploma or something like that. And we've seen other examples. And this is in Colorado, which used to be part of Mexico, right? And not that long ago either. So it got me thinking about, both laws and codes, and also policies which work their way into our schools that have been used to, they've been weaponized to control, how we act, control what we look like, control how we talk. We'll go back into time in a little bit. I want to get your thoughts on this now, though. The kind of language that we use. But I want to stick with these couple of stories, and I want to just get your quick reflections on maybe other examples. Like, what do you see? What are you seeing in your regions? I know, Jubilee, you have children. Like, have they had any experience with this? So I wanted to kind of start with that, and any like thoughts or reflections that you had on any of the articles that we shared. We could go any way.
Well, I can hop in. I think you gave us both of them at the same time. I would say the school, like, the dress code piece. We actually, Energy Converters actually wrote about that. We had a cohort in Milwaukee, and that was one of their topics, along with like, the cafeteria food. But one was it was dress codes, but how it was enforced disproportionately. So basically what was happening was we had Black girls in our group, and there was a strict dress code that had certain parameters, but some of their friends who were less curvy could wear the exact same thing and then not be an issue. And it kind of grew and became this larger thing, and we wrote a report on it. And so let me just try to tie these two thoughts together and make a mention around, the car thing, right? Like, I mean, we both from California, like the car culture, to be honest, for me, that's actually one of the first places where I saw this Black and brown kind of bleed into. I was up north. I wasn't in Southern California. So up north, car shows was where you would actually see like a lot of like, Black and brown people kind of coming together and doing their thing. And so I think it's a few things, man. I think that there's always going to be these people with the power of the pen that's going to try to flex that pen in other ways. I think we see that today, and like, oh, why is that a law versus this thing being a law? It almost reminds me of, rocked up cocaine versus powder cocaine, and how there was a distinction made, but that distinction was clearly aimed and targeted at someone. I think sometimes the law can be a beacon, and other times it can be a bazooka. And I think that when we talking about this, like, it's, that's what King would preach about, right? It's like, well, civil disobedience comes about when you need to defy an immoral law. And I think that some of these things are immoral laws. Then just for the sake of also conversation, there's also times where it's like I started out there and then I was like, oh, I think this shit gets on my nerves too. Like growing up in Oakland, David, you may remember this. Do you remember the whistle tip era?
Yes.
So for those that don't know, culturally speaking,
like is that like the car thing where like
yeah, so it's tied to old schools, but a lot of cars could do them. In the early 2000s, you could put there were things you could put on your tailpipe, and so when you accelerated, it would whistle, and it was loud, man. It was so loud, and it was cool the first time I heard it. The 100th time I heard it, I wanted to pull my hair out. And then there was like a neighborhood, there was like community ordinances that got passed in it. I don't think that lowriders is that. I think that lowriders brings out a certain type of crowd, and I do think that there's a place where people want to try to control, and I think that that's unfortunate. I think that's a real piece of culture. And then I lived in Stockton, where the Asian community, it was a lot of like it was import cars. So like you got like with the muscle car, you got American muscle, lowriders, things like that. And then up north, it was like, cars that were built to kind of go fast. And, this is when Fast and the Furious was out, but that kind of really fused with Asian culture and drifting and things like that. I think, but listen, I've also lived in Kentucky, where there's like things around horses and like rancher culture. And I thought that was cool too. I thought it was really cool. That's how I found out that there was a such thing as black cowboys. I just had never known. I think that when you try to do these things, the people without a lot of power tend to get whipped the worst with targeted laws. And I think these are some targeted laws. And I think it's okay for us to also admit that within those targeted laws, it might be some things that you may or may not agree with, but we got to find ways to discuss it. Because again, dress codes is another one that's tricky. Like, I think that there's a such thing as oppressive dress codes. And then I think also as I get older and I'm in certain places, I'm like, oh, they need a dress code. So I think it's what's appropriate for a child, and not just even like a girl, right? Like, living in Chicago as a kid, I just remember you couldn't wear hats any kind of way because it was so tied to gang culture. In LA, you couldn't wear certain colors. It was so tied to gang culture. So I get that need. I think it's just a question of who is this targeted for? Is it unjust? And if so, how do we move forward? Sorry for that long piece, but you gave us both topics, so I was trying to bring them together and then get a through line.
Yeah, I mean, here's a question. Why is the lowrider so damn low? Like, why you got to why is it so low? I want to know. You bring up lowriders. That's like a huge thing in the Mexican-American community, man. And like what folks may not know, to kind of piece that one together, is that you're right, is post-World War II. And the thing with the Latino families, particularly in places like El Paso and Los Angeles, is that despite the fact that like people were getting homes, and we've done this on the show, blacks and some Mexicans were not particularly getting the rewards that most GIs were getting in order to get that home ownership, as we discussed on the show. But Latino families even still choose to live with their families. Like, it's an all family in the one house kind of scenario. You're living with your abuelita, your grandmother, you're living with your mom and dad, maybe an uncle's in there. So the car became the symbol of freedom. It was the one place that there was a lot of freedom. And I could tell you, they took advantage of that freedom in certain places at night. Scenic Drive here in El Paso, I could tell you, was a place where I could say shrewdly that there was a lot of freedom celebrated between man and lady, and man and lady and lady, all up in that lowrider. But it became a symbol of freedom. So when there was an oppressive state of, that like uptight ass 1950s, like, hey, we don't want this element riding down the street, and they're making the streets unsafe for me and then the rest of the Beaver Cleaver family. Yeah, there were codes outlawing those types of vehicles. But the reason those vehicles were done the way was basically to become individualistic, in particular from,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you know this, brother, from the Pachuco culture that was born and bred right here in El Paso.
Sure. Yep.
And that's a fun story, which, by the way, the Pachuco culture, for our listeners, came from the Zoot Suit riots. Basically, it was this identity that the Mexican Americans created that was essentially a revolt against the status quo of kind of that uptight suit wearing. Hey, everything's got to be starched and bleached and very tight. And they were like, nope, we're going to wear our suits loose because we're swing dancing and we're revolting against the status quo, which led, as you know, to the Mexican American Revolution. So when we talk about codes, what I think is dope about this show is that we get into the deep shit. It's not just as simple as people being like, oh, you're disrupting our nice Sunday with your cars. No, it is a systemic attempt at shutting down
Yeah.
the exercise of freedom, free speech, and the proactive nature of the Brown Beret movement, the civil rights movement, Mexican Americans getting together and standing up for civil rights, Blacks getting up and standing for civil rights. And it was coded in like, we don't like your car. When really what they were saying is, we don't
Right.
like you. And
Yep.
that's some shit right there. And that's cool because I want to get into the talk about like today about like dress code and shit. Like, what are we
Yeah.
telling these kids with the way they're dressing? They're like, hey, you're cool, but you
So
with
you
the
brought up
backwards hat. Yeah.
you brought up zoot suits. So I want to say one
Yes.
quick thing about zoot suits and then pass it off to Jubilee. So the zoot suits were, they were a suit, an oversized suit, baggy, very extravagant, and they were mainly worn by Mexican American Chicanos in the Southwest. And they too were banned during World War II. Because apparently, during the war, we have these like rationing regulations, and they apparently were viewed as a waste of fabric that could have gone towards the war cause. Yeah, right. All right, Jubilee, go ahead. So many examples.
Class is in session, okay? I didn't know much about lowriders. We didn't have those in New York City. And if we saw one, it was like, what is that? So now we did have very tiny cars with huge booming speakers driving around, and like that was supposed to be, some form of notoriety if you had a car that had music that was deafening. But no lowriders. So thank you for that bit. The lowrider piece has me thinking about one, why don't you just leave people alone and let them drive their cars? Like, what's the problem? Like, what are you bothering? Zoot suits, yes.
Well, that's Detroit
what's
Red
up.
in his zoot suit. That's
Yes.
Yep.
Malcolm Little at the time, and
Yes.
his
Wow.
yeah, with his conch hair and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Man, look at Fly.
Yep.
But can you be fly on a plane?
Keep going, Juby. I
keep
wasn't
going,
trying to
Jubilee.
I wasn't
We're
trying
just
to throw you off,
interjecting and
Juby.
shit.
Keep going.
Well, it's too late now. Finish talking about the zoot suit because
Oh,
No, we're
I
good.
was putting it in the background because I think we were talking about it and people didn't really have a sense
visual
of what it was. So
I
it was
got
also a big it was popular in the Black community in the 20s. When and the Harlem Renaissance and Detroit and in Chicago, and it was tied to, if you was prosperous in the Black community. I don't know. I can't speak to it on the Mexican American side, but on the Black side, it had like, it got associated with pimps and pimp culture and things like that. So but I didn't know I know about it from the Black element. I didn't know about it from the brown element. But I was just, we're gonna do that from time to time, Jubilee. We're gonna have examples on the side. Keep going.
mean, that's fine. Toya said I'm just not old enough. I knew about zoot suits, but not the lowriders. I've seen them in movies like Boys in the Hood. So I also
But you an East Coast girl, so yeah.
It was connected to Cali. I didn't know it was connected to like, brown people too.
Southwest. Yep.
Okay. Right. So for whatever reason, the lowriders got me thinking, just leaving people alone. Like, what exactly are you fearful of? It's something connected to a group of people, connected to their culture or a way in which they want to express themselves, which is not harming anyone. Even though I know, to Charles's point, maybe it brings a group of people out who, I don't know, but I'm not going to assume that that's bad, right? But it made me start thinking about dollar vans. Y'all ever heard about dollar vans in New York City?
No.
Right. So it made me think about dollar vans because there was a strike like in the 1980s. And so people started getting in their car. Usually it would be West Indian and most likely one of my Jamaican brothers or sisters. And they would start to go and pick people up in their cars to get them to and from the train station. Right. Just like, and then when New York City got wind of that, they shut it down. Like, you know, like this is not good, even though it was helping large immigrant communities get to where they had to be, that because they relied on the
We call those
transit
jitneys.
system.
Yeah, jitney, right?
It's a jitney. Yeah.
Oh, jitney. Yeah, we call them dollar vans, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so anyway, so that's what it made me think of. Like sometimes or many times as immigrant communities or Black and brown people, we start doing something or we have something that adds to our community, right? Just by being our beautiful selves, and somebody comes along and shuts it down, even if it's harmless or even if it's helpful. So initially when the dollar vans came around, they were helpful. And then they got wind of how much money those people were getting that wasn't going to the city and or whatever, and then they shut it down, and then they had to go fight for it to be like legalized. So now if you go to New York City, like it's not $1 no more, but you can most definitely get a dollar van that's gonna you're gonna pay less than you would on public transit, and you're gonna probably get there faster because they drive a little fast. So that's where my mind went. And then in terms of the dress code, I'm like, why is this still like an issue? So from personal experience, like I never had a uniform like when I went to school, but my kids, they've been to schools where it was all uniform, and now that we're in Maryland, they don't wear uniform. And I've never seen an issue with uniform with my kids. But when I look at the article that you sent, Dave, and I see that one, there are students advocating for change, that's encouraging to me, because I really feel like that should be where the locus of control is. And the fact that it's not there is very telling. Like if we really want to make a shift and have students embrace whatever it is, then they need to be a part of the decision-making process. And I think that in our country's big age of 2023, the fact that we're still making decisions for adolescents is really why we keep on hitting our heads against the wall, because why can't it be a for us bias? Get the students' voices in it, right? I think we spend all this time preaching and teaching the kids, right? From the time they come out the womb, we're teaching them, and never have that gradual release where it's like, all right, your turn to step up and lead. What do you think is appropriate, right? And we can be the adults that sort of guide that conversation. But how different do you think a dress code would be if it actually came from students, if their voices were in on it and they were also responsible for helping to enforce it? It's way easier to get students in on something that they participated in from the very beginning, versus us being the nagging ass adults and your skirt's too high, it's just like, of course they don't want to hear it, and they're at that phase where they really are beginning to express themselves in terms of their dress and makeup and hair and all of that. And so I think I think my recommendation would be, if you're a principal of a school, or if you're a parent that has a kid that is going to school, figure out how you can include their voice in on the decision-making process. The more that we try to stay in control of these things, the less influence we have, the less the kids want to hear it, the more rebellious they become, and the more dismissive they become.
Yep. Yeah. So I got some stuff to say about the dress code thing too, because I've worked in a school that had a dress code, and I've worked in schools that have not had dress codes. And I mean, most recent school I worked at that had a dress code was probably 3 years ago. And these are schools in East Oakland. When I've been principal, mainly at the high school level, we were, if we had a dress code, like everybody was going to follow it. Not the adults though, but the children. And now that I reflect on it, I don't know if I have any regrets, but I definitely would have done things differently. Because yeah, I guess so. No excuses, no regrets. Number one, you imagine being like a teenager and being forced to wear the same exact clothes and colors and styles as everybody else. That's almost inhumane in and of itself, right? What we were trying to do is root out and minimize the risk of colors showing up. So it was kind of responding to the gang activity in the community. Well, you know what? We still had issues with gangs, right? And I mean, we would I don't know if we ever suspended kids, but we would send them home or have their parents show up if they were out of uniform. And, we were pretty militant about it. And if I had to do it all over again, I would definitely do it differently. I think it's interesting even as a brown Latino, Mexican American, Chicano educator and school leader. If you are not careful and reflective about your practices, you can find yourself in a situation where you are adopting white supremacist practices that are not pro-child. And I want to say that it's like I want to put that out there, and that's why I think it's important, especially for us, as we're moving in, as you're in leadership and working with school leaders and organizations and other entities, that we're constantly reflecting on our practices, because it is so dominant that it's very easy to fall into that trap. And the trap is living in a country that has a very strong influence of white supremacy, and it's very easy to fall into that, where all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing exactly what I'm not supposed to be doing, right? So I wanted to put that out there.
Well, I think so. Let me just sum up what I'm hearing too, because I think Jubilee and both David, and for the record, I think David, Jube, and Omar have all had some experience in running a school in some form or fashion, and I've had it from a district level. So what I'm feel like I'm hearing is I'm not hearing just fully do away with a dress code. Like that, there is some utility to having some form of dress code. What I heard Jubilee say was, involve students in on that, and actually students tend to be your best enforcers on certain things, right? I know that I've worked and supported certain schools where they had if you earn this color hoodie or this color thing, it represents you've gotten to a place as a student or stuff like that. So that kind of incentivize certain things so you can wear, in that. And David, like I said, you ran a school, especially in East Oakland, where a lot of stuff could happen. I just want to make sure I'm hearing that, because I want to show some love to the people. I have friends that run schools, and I used to be a lot more bullish on things such as dress codes. And then I worked in the upper echelon. I've heard parents, I have heard parents say, look, it's easier for me to buy 4 pair of slacks and 5 shirts instead of having to deal with this or whatever the case is. Or we're trying to turn our school around, and the school that we like wears vests and things like this. So I just want to, I think this conversation, I love our show because there's a nuanced take to be had here, right? Omar is a school with young kids. I am sure that if he saw a kid wearing something that was inappropriate, now inappropriate is subjective, but I think that there are certain things it's inappropriate. It's all right, we need to figure this out. And the good schools tend to have an extra hoodie or some sweatpants or something with the school that can kind of make that happen. I live in the south suburbs of Chicago, and I'll go get my hair cut. I get my hair cut mostly every week. And then sometimes it coincides when the kids are getting out of school. So you'll see there's my barber, and there's a really young barber, and he got all the kids or whatever. And all of them have clear backpacks. It's just a thing in Chicago, in the Chicago area, that you need clear backpacks. David and Omar and Jube, I don't know if y'all have come into contact with that. But
I remember it, man. Yeah, it was a big wave for a while and shit.
And here's the thing: I live in a place where they got switches on guns. Do y'all know what switches are? Switches is when you modify a gun and it has a longer clip, or that's not a switch. The switch is when you take a semi-automatic gun weapon and you turn it. There's a switch you can put on it, and it makes it an automatic weapon. But basically, they were trying to. Kids were finding ways to smuggle in guns because they got ghost guns and stuff like that. Ghost guns is guns that's not made of metal; they made of plastic, and you can kind of get through detection.
Mission Impossible shit, right there.
But here's the thing, all right?
I think plastic guns and shit.
Because I just want to signal for our audience, right? Because I am 1,000% in support of this. I was one of those kids that was this is a stupid thing. And then it's like, oh, I also have to be like an accountable adult of like certain things that may or may not be necessarily happening. And then I haven't hit that parent realm, right? David is a parent, Jubilee is a parent. So like I've also seen parents hit a certain snag where they were like, hey, check this out. Like we need this. So I think that as we had this conversation, there's the authoritarian piece of it that I think that we're having a conversation about. And then I also think that there's parents and staff and people that's like, yo, check it out, yo. We need to, these things need to happen. I was just throwing that in for the fodder because I think, I know there's somebody watching this somewhere and they're like, well, I got a dress code in my school, but that ain't why I got a dress code. I got a dress code for these specific reasons.
But
so
I'm gonna add gasoline onto the fodder right now, then, Charles, if I may. I think thinking about like focusing on the dress code issue or other kinds of practices or policies that schools, and now I'm talking mainly about charter schools, right? Where you've historically had a requirement that students have to show up for a summer program or this many parent orientations, or give so many hours and be dressed in a particular kind of clothing and style with colors. As you do all of those things, right? As you add all these layers of requirements, whether we like it or not, we are creating self-selected groups of students and a kind of a crafted demographic to your school, right? So it's kind of historically either implicitly or explicitly been used to produce a particular type of student that shows up to your school, right? The very high need student parent may not be able to show up, to X number of parent nights, or may not be able to do a summer bridge because they're working, or may not be able to, do a uniform because maybe they get the clothes, but maybe, they're not able to wash the clothes or whatever. And I know there's ways around that, but that's a real thing. And I think, I see a lot of the schools and school organizations that are kind of pushing back and moving away from some of those practices. But that's definitely an unintended consequence of these types of policies and codes.
Well, I mean, I got a question for y'all because ultimately, like, I've got to I'm in all transparency, I've got a dress code in our middle school, and the rationale for that dress code in the middle school, it's kind of a different conversation. I'm happy to hear kind of what the audience thinks about this, what y'all think about this, but this isn't clearly coming from like some kind of totalitarian situation, because our high school is almost, free dress within like some pretty decent restrictions. And we worked a lot with the kids to kind of figure out what that was. But for a lot of our low income families, it helps immensely to have the consistency of the uniform to say, oh, this is easy. Like, we don't need to worry about what they're dressing. It's simple. It's just a polo. It doesn't need to have EPLA on it. It's got these khakis. We get a ton of that clothes. So if families can't afford it, we can help provide it. And it helps internally in terms of like, well, we know what grade level this kid is because of this color. It helps with the families to be like, hey, man, there's no nonsense. We know what this is. And the clothing they can find is pretty cheap. But ultimately, it's also, like, teenage years are interesting time. And like, this is the time when teenagers start comparing themselves to each other. And middle school is really that time when I see it with my niece all the time. It's like, I'm wearing Aviator Nation. Kids wearing Gucci and shit, which is nuts. And it becomes this time of using that as a superiority component. So, I'm looking out for like the real Nikki here, which, like, dope ass comment, but like, hey man, like, where do we draw the line in terms of us helping out our kids so that we avoid that stuff? Because ultimately kids are going to do that with themselves. Oh, look, them fake ass Jordans. These are the real Jordans. Like, oh, you're wearing that clothes? We got this clothes. It happens in high school to a certain extent, but what I found is that if you mitigate that in middle school a bit and teach kids about that, it then gets even greater mitigated in high school, where they're not bullying each other for that shit because we taught them how to do it. So it's more of a question to tune of like, is there a positive aspect to the dress code to help in such things, or do we still think that this is like some authoritative stuff? I'd push back on that authoritative shit and be like, nah, it works well for us, maybe not for you all.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? And I think I'm always going back to mission and vision. Like, why are we talking about this? Like, what ultimately, when these children walk out of these doors with their certificate, diploma, degree, whatever it is, what is it that we want to be true? And how does the dress code help us get to that place, or not having a dress code help us get to that place? You know, so it's just, I think on the authoritative side, you're always going to have some adults in the field that just want to tell kids what to do because it makes it easier, and it's, you know, it's easier to control. It's black and white, and this is it, right? And so you're always going to have that, and that is the authoritative piece, and that usually is driven by fear. It's not driven by just having like real cerebral conversations around like, what are we hoping, right? Like, are we trying to get all of our students to graduate and like go work at UPS? Like, nothing wrong with working at UPS or right being an employee, but what kind of mindset are we trying to have our students, you know, engage in, or, you know, what kind of paradigm are we having, or do we want them to embrace? So I think like on the authoritative side, it's usually on the fear, right? You don't want the bullying, and you don't want, you know, people being made fun of and all of that. But I've seen that happen with uniforms. Absent of a conversation about character, absent of a conversation about empathy, right? And just being a good human being and being kind, that shit can happen with, it doesn't matter. I've seen kids in the same uniform bully kids in the same uniform. They're gonna find something, you know what I'm saying? That your one of your eyes is bigger than the other. Oh, your haircut. Because like you said, Omar, that's when we talk about adolescence, we get into that 6th, 7th grade. That's the time, you know, and where I'm from, you got till 3rd grade, you got till 2nd grade, and they're gonna get you at recess about something, you know, because it's just a part of it. So I think like the authoritative piece, I don't think is really helpful because none of the stakeholders' voices are a part of the decision-making process. Yep. And I think anytime you have that, you're going to get a bunch of pushback because you want people to just embrace and understand whatever you're putting forward, and they're not included in the process. And then on the other side, where it's like, you know, wear what you want or what have you, I don't think that's good either. So I am for just like a distribution of leadership, shared decision making, and the authoritative piece as it relates to, I don't want to say appropriateness, because like Charles said earlier, that's so subjective, but there's got to be a line. All the schools I ran had uniform. When I was an AP, uniform. When I was a principal, uniform. Nobody got sent home because they had on brown shoes instead of black shoes. Like, we weren't wasting time talking about that. We spent more time talking about, hey, this is our focus. We want your babies in here feeling safe, feeling comfortable, and learning and reading and thriving. And that's all we want. So by you sending them wearing this, that helps us get to this end result. Can you help us with that? And parents, of course, are like, absolutely. So to me, that's what the conversation should be about.
I mean, I would say, what I was gonna just add was, I think the line of thinking that Julie just took us down, which was good and sober, but I think that is how you end up with like a code, right? Where it's like when you leave things too subjective, when you leave things like you're interpreting on a case-by-case basis, there's no way to be fair in that. So you tend to get to a place where you're like, okay, look, here's the rules. Here's what it is. Here's the standard. And now I get to focus on educating or teaching or whatever the case is. I think, but there's a few different things. I played basketball in high school, and on game day, you had to wear a suit. I think at home games, sometimes they we could wear our sweatsuits, our track suits of the school, but when we were going to away games, we had to wear a tie, not a suit, but you had to wear a tie. And I remember it being like a thing, right? But then I remember like some men showing us how to wear ties and what we look like in ties and like how to wear it and stand up and kind of be proud in that. And I think that, I think there can be good that comes out of a lot of different things. I think, again, with these two topics, I'm looking at it from I'm looking at there's a framing of authoritarianism right around the lowrider conversation and this conversation. But then intellectually speaking, as we go deeper into any of those conversations, there's nuances that are involved there, because I know parents shop for schools, and I know that one of the things that some parents look at from where I come from, especially if they can't afford to send their kid to a private school, well, do them kids dress like they at a private school? Like, do they have like a vest or a jacket that they wear? Do they have this thing? Like, again, we're leaving out entities that parents in a lot of places like this stuff, right? Like that parents want this. I remember when there was a school in OUSD that was thinking about getting rid of their dress codes. It wasn't some authoritarian people. It was parents that was saying, I want to buy 4 pairs of khakis and 4 pairs of blue khakis in a blouse or a shirt, and I want to be done. And as the school, you should have a branded shirt that we can just buy here to kind of make things easier. And I think, but to the people that's watching our show, there's a deeper thing here. And the deeper thing is that even though we can find that there, and I think, I do think that we've taken the respectability thing a little bit too far. I believe that, we started talking about, I learned about respectability politics in the early 2000s when I was coming out of high school and stuff like that. But then now that I've kind of been hanging around like some of the older people in my family, or there was like, there's also decency. There's also, I want to see you look a certain type of way. There's also like, when you're going for a job, I want you to be able to do whatever. And I do think that there's becoming this cultural divide, and to the point where it's refreshing when I would go back to the South and I see Black people my age, younger, dressed up on Sundays, like dressed up for brunch. And like, I like wearing suits now. I like my Nikes and my Timbs, and I like Jordans and stuff like that. I also like pieces like this that can kind of go in both ways, and I can wear it with a tie or I can wear it with a shirt. So I think I applaud you. Just kudos for like a nuanced conversation, because again, there's a lot of things that we could say, but I know both of y'all are parents, and I know if there's certain places y'all are going and that boy come down them stairs or around that corner and he look a certain way, you're gonna be like, hey man, what we and I got homies that got daughters, and I've seen this happen. I've seen like, she's 15, she's about to go out with her friends, and she comes around the corner and he got a look, and he was like, hey, the conversation stopped. And he was like, hey, check this out. Let me let you know where you're not about to go. Like, let me let you know what's about to happen here. I do think that those are different things, though, instead of like, authoritarian ways to kind of control people or whatnot. But how do you merge that conversation? How do you make that humane? And I think Jubilee said that earlier. Bring in young people to be a part of that conversation. What does that mean? Let's have an exchange. And usually when you do it like that, you tend to get better results. You tend to get better like enforcement, because I run a youth org. Let me tell you, ain't nobody harder on kids than kids. Like, I'm the person that's like, we don't need to kick this kid out. No, they missed 3 sessions, Dr. Cole. We said we was going to do this. They made a commitment. They didn't do it. So I think that if you introduce young people to power earlier, if you can teach young people to deal with power, handle power, negotiate power, I think that we could actually start to raise a better generation that's not fully corrupted by power.
Can I just jump in? Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if I told y'all this story. So I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Charles. I think what'll bring it together definitely is giving the students an opportunity to, lend their voice to the process. But I also think that I just lost my train of thought. So I'll go to the Harvard story and then I'll come back. But y'all know my son went to Harvard in the summer, right? Really prestigious program, business entrepreneurship. That's his thing. First day of class. Maybe I told you, Charles. First day of class, I wanted to make sure my baby was lotioned up, because Black people cannot be ashy. You can't. It's a crime. Right. So I made sure my child was good and greasy. I mean, he was smell good, fresh haircut, everything. Take a picture of him in front of the Harvard Business School sign and send it to my family chat. And everybody's like, go sit, go sit, go sit. And one of his uncles was like, slides? He don't got no sneakers. He doesn't have whole shoes on his feet. And I'm like, whole shoes on his feet. I'm like, I didn't even notice that. I was just trying to make sure that my child had all his classroom supplies and that he was not ashy and that he was there on time, right? And it sparked this whole conversation with my family about dress code and what's appropriate. And it's like, oh man, he's at Harvard, and like, is that appropriate for him to? There's international kids, and there's all these big wig professors coming to present. And for me as a parent, I'm like, well, he was clean, he's fully clothed, ain't nothing hanging out nowhere. He got on slides and socks, which is like a cultural thing now, right? A hip hop thing or whatever. But my child was confident when he walked in that room, and he was confident for the entire week. And he got out of the program when he was supposed to get out of the program. And on the final presentation day, he wore shoes. He wore a whole vest and slacks, and he was dressed up for that, right? So for me, I think that is the goal. When a child is able to understand the difference, right, of what is appropriate for this scenario and what's appropriate for this scenario. And as parents, and I think as educators, we do get to hold the line, you know, and help them to interpret that as they develop and as they mature.
Yep. So we're talking about, and I'm sure your son was comfortable on 4 of those 5 days when he was in his comfortable shoes, right?
He was comfortable all 5 days because he also likes to dress up. But in his mind, it was the first day. It's all these new people. He's one of 3 Black people in the room, right? But he went in as himself, and that's what made me proud. So if they would have called me and be like, yo, you got to pick him up, I would have been pissed off because he got in the program because of this, you know? And so, yeah, that's my.
So we're talking about breaking the codes. And what I hear you talking about, Jubilee and Charles, to some extent is it's code switching, right? Knowing, you know, for people of color, knowing how to navigate a world that is kind of entrenched in white culture, right? In white supremacist culture. And we have to understand that it's kind of it's a negotiation, right? You do have to like play the game to a certain point. And, you know, it's just part of like growing up, you know, and it's an important skill to have. I also heard Charles talk a lot about, you know, things that were just like straight up like authoritarian. And so part of the reason I wanted to do the show is to like make the link back to, again, the founding of our country, right? Talking about at one point in time, we had a system that allowed for the legalization of slavery, right? Post-slavery, you had black codes, right? You also had, you know, a system even before all of that of, you know, creating, you know, Native American reservations, and under the Spanish rule in California and the Southwest, missions, which had their own like education system, which was all about, you know, assimilation by force, right? These are all imposed on people. There's no conversation, there's no dialogue. It is pure like authoritarianism. Even in the American Southwest, you know, post 1848, when the United States acquired, you know, probably like 1/4 of the country from Mexico for $5 million, were English only codes in schools, right? Where you could only speak English. And those lasted up until the, you know, mid 1900s, if not later. You know, my parents were like, they got the switch if they spoke Spanish in school, right? They were like physically harmed. These are all things that are imposed on us. And now we're trying to figure out, like, how do we untie some of this stuff? Like, is this practice, is it something, does it have a utility for our community? Or is it something that we just need to do away with? And I think what I heard you all say is like, what matters really is that people are at the table to have the dialogue, right? And to not have any kind of change or no change imposed on us. So that's kind of like the problem solving place I wanted to get to. And obviously we could talk about those things for a long time. We only have a couple of minutes left. Omar, what are your thoughts on given where we're at right now?
Oh man, it's time to conclude the things, man.
Yeah.
No, man, I think the conversation today was dope because it all comes back to what are we doing to equip our kids to understand systems of choice, power, and autonomy? Because at the end of the day, we have 2 things happening, right? You've got dress code as an example of what I think for the most part is kind of an authoritarian way of kind of subjugating behavior. I've had a long talk about how this always looks, because it's always bent like towards the females, right? And I don't
Go
know,
to
man.
a
That's like
club.
some
Go to
that's
City Nights
like
when you 20
yeah,
years
that's
old
like
in
some
the Bay
Sharia
Area.
law shit that like I have a lot of shit like grappling with, dude, because I'm like, yo, listen, like why we got all this shit for, like, you can't wear this skirt too high, you can't wear this shirt like with more bikini straps, and then it's just like you look at a female dress code, look at the men dress code, it's like this it's like one's as long as the Bible and the other one's as long as like a pamphlet in your dentist office. And it's like, this is, I'm not down with that. So what does that tell me? It is once again, a subjugation of females or men being afraid. Be like, well, like, yo, instead of being afraid, which is, I think, the moral of this story, the moral of this podcast, what are we doing to educate and empower and kind of take that veil off? That veil of like, hey, kids, this is how the world subjugates you. So why don't we put you into authority to start making some good decisions? Because I thought Jubilee said it really dope, where she's like, when kids know what situation calls for what dress, what action, what manner of speech. I mean, I think code switching is something that is very congruent with the conversation today. Like, I'm gonna have a conversation on this podcast a bit different than I'm gonna have with my uncle, a bit different than I'm gonna have, with some of my friends. And people are like, what, Omar, you don't keep it real? Like, no, it's always real, but there's a different way of approaching situations. And I think by empowering kids to have that knowledge, you're doing the world a greater justice, because you're proactively empowering with love versus reactively harming with fear. And I'm gonna leave it at that, because we have 57 minutes, and I'm gonna, as the kids say, STFU. Yeah, because we got sponsors and shit. I'm gonna be careful about that, ladies. How you feel about that, Doc?
Jubilee is 107 years old. She is 107. Good, very good, Ju. Very, very good.
I figured it out.
What did I miss?
She didn't. When he said the thing, she was working it out in her head, and her mind was blown. She was so proud of herself. I will say this, man, and I think here's why I appreciate today's topic, because I think the internet has trained us to be very extreme on something, like bullish on something one way or the other. And I think that this is a topic that has a lot of nuance to it. I also don't want to just I'm not just giving that to white people or dominant culture about looking nice and what that means. Like I refuse. And I think that, and what I mean by that is, as I get older and I start to, I knew a lot of my family went to jail or prison or got in trouble. And then later on in life, I learned that like there were these other things that happened, and I started to see these pictures of them. Like, there's somebody who fought in the Civil War who was 17 years old, but he was dressed to the nines when he was on break to go see, the family that he was building. And it was a sense of pride. Or like being able to watch, Malcolm X make that transformation and reading about that. I think that our clothes and how we look, like, I think it matters. And I think when I've seen, I've been in a reflective place with my aunt passing, but looking at older pictures of my grandmother and great grandmother, and like when they would get dressed to go out or go to a place, some places got standards. And I would just say, on the nuance tip, I remember when David Stern, the NBA commissioner at the time, implemented a dress code. And it was like, a lot of things about race. And also David Stern was just a gangster, like in either good and bad. Like he didn't really take no crap, but he was trying to take the game global. And then Iverson said this, because Iverson was like the biggest culprit, right? Dressed with his hats, his braids and stuff. And he was like, hey man, and him and David Stern had a conversation. He was like, look, you can feel how you want to feel about it. We pay you millions and millions of dollars. And there's people at McDonald's that get paid $5 an hour and they wear a uniform. But when you wear my uniform, y'all are going to make so much more money down the line. And now the NBA is this huge international business that's about to build 2 new teams in Canada and in Las Vegas and in all these different places. I'm just saying that to say, use all the parts of our brain when we talk about this, because I am so in on the authoritarian piece and why are we doing this and stuff like that. And when things are unjust, they are unjust. And I also understand that need for ancestors of ours or older people of ours and our cultures to feel that sense of pride and want to see things certain way. Like, I don't think that they was trying to come down on Jube, on your son, Jube. I think that it's also like, man, I'm so proud of this moment. This picture would be in our family for generations moving on. Like, he can have the one in the slides, but can you give our legacy one of him as a young boy to the nines in front of this prestigious place? Because we've also seen Omar come on this station very proudly wear the memorabilia from the school that he went to, even though he has some criticisms. And if you find Black people that went to HBCUs, they love to represent those things, right? So I think multiple things can be true. I think it just has to be on how do you do it humanely, and when do you know which is which? And sometimes people might agree with certain things that we might perceive to be something else. And it took me years to understand that. And I'm sure the people in the NBA might feel some kind of way, but now they done made that a fashion show that walk in and they get to wear some outrageous and ridiculous stuff. But these people, the highest people, not making $5 million no more. They making $100 million a year now. And I think that they saw a plan in that. So that's my non-answer, not necessarily non-committal, but nuanced experience with today's topics, whether it be low riders or whistle tips or bad policy versus I love my institution and these are the parameters in which I need to show up in said institution. It's come as you are, but not stay that way. And there go that damn dog. Right on cue.
Yeah, I'll go quickly here. I like this comment by Nikki. Breaking the codes by choosing self-development, right? Over everything. And so we talk about self-development at the individual level, but on the show we've also talked about self-determination for our communities. And that's really what today's conversation was about. And the conversation has definitely become incredibly contentious and like binary thinking, like you're either with us or you're against us. It's us versus them. But I think today we did a pretty good job of exploring the nuance on, and we didn't agree on everything, but we did talk about the nuance. And the last thing I'll say is this is also a timely topic because you see the attacks on against gender studies or women's studies or critical race studies, right? It's happening right now, and it's connected as to why they want to, take away the right of people to study these topics. Because when you study these topics, you can have a more informed conversation about what is happening in the here and now, and make the connection of how it is tied to the last 200-300 years of the founding of this country, right? And that's really what we have to do if we're going to ever get to a place of peace and unity as a people, is to not just start looking forward to the future, but we have to look back and understand how we got to this place. And part of that is, again, the laws, policies, and these things obviously work their way into our schools, and we have to be able to examine them. So that's what I got to say. Thank you all. Jubilee, I think you're a closer, right?
I guess I am. I was gonna say that I agree with what the real Nikki J wrote as well. Break the codes by choosing self-development over everything, because I really feel like that is what education is about. And I know it might be a long shot, and we may be a long ways off, but I really think that topics like this can be used to help students develop their critical thinking. Honestly, like, again, we are hoping that our children are going to go out and run the world one day. Are we supporting them to become that? Are we giving them the tools, helping them to develop and sharpen their tools to be able to do so? And so I think by continuing to, like I said earlier, just have them as a part of the conversation, as a part of not just the conversation, but the decision making, then hopefully they'll be able to look at their own selves, right? Just like the example I gave about my son, right? And just saying like, okay, this is, I can swing this hair, I can wear this hair, right? But I wouldn't wear this here, right? And also understanding perception, right? And like how what we do, what we wear, how we show up, right, may bring about a certain perspective or perception of us and who we are, right? Unintentionally. And can we deal with the backlash of that? Can we deal with people seeing us in a way, a different light than we had hoped to shine? So I think I think it could be an incredible opportunity for self-development and for developing critical thinking in students if we just if we didn't have to move in fear and fake urgency, because we have to decide now, if we could actually commit to having these conversations with them, I think it would really help their self-development in the long run.
Gotcha.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that takes us to the end. Unless anybody has any last words. Thank you all for joining us. Episode 118 of the South Star Classroom, breaking the codes, and definitely more to come. Thanks everybody in the audience too for your comments, helping to move our conversation forward. Peace out.
Orale.